Welcome to Tech Talk, brought to you by Now Media Networks. Join host Greg Schaefer as he takes you into the fast-paced world of technology, exploring breakthroughs in AI, cybersecurity, and beyond. Discover the strategies and insights driving today's tech revolution.
Wireless and robotics, these are two technologies that continue to accelerate. And they do so because they bring value and convenience to our lives. With us today is Jim Bradfield joining us again. He is the CEO and director of NAS Wireless. Jim, thank you so much for joining us again today.
My pleasure, sir.
So I know we've discussed before in a few of the previous segments that your family's been involved with wireless for over 100 years now. And a lot of our conversations have centered around the wireless networks that are supporting robotics and automation for a whole variety of industries. And we've also touched upon the security needs for those networks and those configurations. I'd like to dive a little bit more into what are some of the cybersecurity issues that your teams are actually seeing with automated robotics in a variety of these industries?
Yep. Well, it turns out that the most targeted industry for cybersecurity issues and breaches and things like that is starting in 2023 was manufacturing. It accounts for almost 27% or so of attacks. So, and this is because everything has been set up with IoT functionality. That's the Internet of Things, and most of that is connected via wireless. And it turns out that a lot of that is on a separate wireless network and is not secured. And what typically happens is that, these networks go out, they go out and communicate with other things. They're not part of the secure network within the company. So they're on their own. If somebody has messed up the security requirements, the programming, not put in the right security for the wireless itself, it gets hacked. And, it turns out that it's a pretty big deal. People are going to be spending $24 billion a year to do updated robotics and automation. And, that's a real big deal. And this is a really simple thing. Things get hacked. Like, for example, the automated robot in a car, like a Jeep Cherokee, for example, the sensors in the wheels facilitate the wireless communication. Well, it can be exploited by a hacker. And essentially what happens is the guys get in there, they connect, and they actually make things move about, and they make a real mess of, for example, the car can go anywhere. It can stop, it can start, it can do things that you don't want it to do. Well, imagine if you're building something in a robotics network over in, in a manufacturing plant. Well, I mean, heck, a single error and that happens to the network, the whole thing goes out. It could be deadly for somebody. And that's a really big deal. And so cyber criminals actually get in there and do a hell of a lot of mess for everybody. And that's really what happens. The sensors are vulnerable to ransomware. They get malware, it's unsecured and whatever. And, you get a hijacking, you get a signal modification, you get, intentional attacks, you get things like that where they can even steal the information. It's really a big deal. So that's something that has to be addressed.
When we're talking about wireless networks, we can talk about in manufacturing, for example. So in my mind, I'm imagining like a factory floor or something like that, where you got all sorts of robotic machines that are doing all sorts of things, assembling something. And you're talking about wireless communication between them. Well, most people think about wireless, they think about one of two things. They think about your Wi-Fi, like at your Starbucks, for example, or they think about the cell phone. So that's sort of like wireless voice communication. Is the technology the same that's used within manufacturing, or is it something completely specialized for these environments?
Well, it's supposed to be specialized for the environment. For the network side that doesn't operate with robotics, it's completely secured and been secured for years and years and years. But what happens is the same kind of network is used on robotics, but it's usually managed by the robotics people themselves, and they don't secure it properly. So that's what happens. The breaches that we used to be getting, there's been 70,000 breaches from companies last year alone, just through their wireless networks. I mean, that's a lot. So that's the biggest issue. They're not properly secured.
So then this almost sounds like that it's a third-party risk management issue where you have the robotics vendor that is responsible for maintaining and managing not only their equipment but also the connections, and that's not something that's managed usually by the company itself, the manufacturer itself.
Usually not. No, that's usually subbed out to those guys who do the manufacturing of those robots and support those robots. And the biggest deal there is, they don't follow procedures that you would in a typical company. I mean, you've got to, so really what needs to happen is, they need to air gap these things if possible. The manufacturer just has to have better defaults for IoT so that nothing is actually able to get into the system to breach it. And they have to have the access limited. They don't limit the access to the robotics as much as they should. They need to make sure that there's no human error. And what happens is they get the phishing attacks like we talked about before. All the other things that happen in other networks are now happening on these robotics networks because now they're behind in corporate security, right? They're not doing the same things. They're not doing built-in access controls as well as they could. They're not doing multi-factor authentication. They're not training their employees to be really careful about, phishing attacks and things like that. And all of that kind of stuff, really actually causes a problem. And even when you have the preventive measures going, robots can still suffer the breach. They could have a problem with the lines of code that have been upgraded to them and things like that. And it's like, when Cisco has a network, for example, and they send out a bug release and quick fix this. Well, if they don't fix that, then there's a bug problem and the code can be attacked. And it's relatively straightforward and simple, but they just don't do it. And they don't encrypt all the robotic data. You need to encrypt everything, all the data, just like you would in the regular network. And then, develop a plan for that.
So what can the business do then? Those are all wonderful things that we need to do to be able to secure the network, but how can the business ensure that the robotics vendor is actually performing these actions? Because ultimately, if you don't have your robotics working properly, you're going to suffer your business loss if you can't manufacture your widgets, for example. There's got to be something that the business can do, even if they're not managing the network themselves.
Yeah, the typical thing that they need to do is they need to actually develop a plan with the robotics manufacturer and with the guys who are supporting all that. They could be an entirely separate group within the company typically, right? And what they need to do is do an incident response kind of a plan and a full out plan that you would do. The thing that we used to do probably 10 or 15 years ago when we first started security on these networks, that's what they need to really do. They need to start getting those plans out. And, they need to have a regular review of their security posture and all of the plans. And that's not happening. And they have to train the employees really well to understand and make sure that the access is limited, that there's not a whole bunch of guys coming in with, bring your own phone device kind of thing and connecting to the network. And, and they have to work closer with the manufacturer, and they can work with guys like us, guys like you. I mean, that's what we do, right? We fix the cybersecurity issues, and we help them make sure they have a plan to work with the manufacturer.
Well, you bring up an excellent point about the business continuity, and I was actually about ready to ask it, so I think you read my mind. We always encourage businesses to perform tabletop exercises for business continuity purposes at least once a year, more if necessary, so that you learn your gaps beforehand. But I think that what you're bringing out is that it's critical to involve those third-party providers, in this case, the robotics vendors, because if they're critical to your business, you can't just assume that that system is going to be operational.
That's correct. Yeah, it's not necessarily going to be operational because they have to look at all the lines of code as well and all the things that they've actually put in there, the things that they've updated. The most recent things they've updated could have a bug in them. They could have put the wrong kind of code in there, you know, that's something that's not operational for them. They just got to be really careful. And I think the closer you work with your manufacturer and with companies like us, like you, to make sure that this thing is looked at on at least every 6 months. You know, it's more often, even a pen test or something like that, something for that group that's special to that group to make sure they don't get any, they don't have any openings and get any attacks. And that's what needs to happen.
Absolutely, and just to remind our viewers as well too that because this is wireless, the attacker doesn't necessarily have to be within the facility to exploit any sort of vulnerability. It's wireless. There have been numerous accounts over the last decades, I guess you could say now, of criminals sitting out in the parking lot and hooking into a wireless network and then doing nefarious things or grabbing grabbing information. And certainly that could be an issue as well too. Now you mentioned penetration tests just quickly. What would be one of the aspects that the business might expect from a penetration test on their robotics wireless networks that they would need to do?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we typically do with that is we do it like we do in a human test, right? Where we're actually going through and we're conducting whether or not that thing is taking a look at what's coming in from the outside and whether it's actually responding to any outside command. And you have to run through everything just to see what's going on. It's just like the human test, you know, and the human guys also are actually manipulating it, and they work on, you know, the network itself. And if they click on a phishing attack or anything else like that, you know, and so we kind of combine not only a phishing, but a, you know, a penetration test to see what's happening, what we can get into the network. And, you know, and also we go over that with them as well and make sure that they understand what they did, you know, because they may never know, and it could lay dormant for months, right? You just don't know when that's going to happen.
Right. Well, if they needed to get a hold of you or wanted to get a hold of you, what's the easiest way?
jbjr@naswireless.com, and
Ec-
they can call me at 925-382-0410, and I'm happy to take it.
And naswireless.com is your website, right?
That's correct, sir.
Yeah, that's easy to remember. Well, Jim, appreciate you again sharing your wisdom and your experience with us and our viewers, and certainly that helps everybody stay more secure.
Right? Hopefully so.
And we'll be right back.
Thanks, buddy.
Stick around. We'll be right back with more cutting-edge discussions and tech insights on Tech Talk, only on Now Media TV.